Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
My name is Matt.
And today we have another special bonus episode for you. So, both myself and Matt spent last week at the Sci-Fi London Film Festival. Well, I say we were both in our separate homes watching online.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about the films from last week. We're going to be giving short reviews of the feature films from the festival.
And we're going to keep all of these spoiler-free as well. So anybody who wasn't able to join in the festivities and wants to catch these films later down the line, we're going to keep them spoiler-free when we're chatting through these. So don't worry about that side of things.
James, what did you think of the festival? What did you think of the whole virtual experience? I think you've been to more film festivals than I have.
Yeah, so I did like a similar thing with Fright Fest earlier this year. So I've been to one of the Fright Fests previously. I've only been to one. I've only been to the one in 2019. So they went online with that festival as well this year. Obviously, with everything with the pandemic and stuff, they still wanted to have the festival happening, so they did it that way. And Sci-Fi London this year have done the same thing. And I've got to say, it did run pretty smoothly. Like, they had a few hitches at the start, just with sort of like getting things going, but they weren't that noticeable. It took like no time at all for them to get back into the swing of it and sort of have these films broadcasting live.
Yeah, they did a good job. I was really happy with it. I really enjoyed it. What I noticed most of all was that, like, I definitely saw more films last week than I would have attending a film festival any other way, because I just haven't got the time. Like, if this was happening in London, there's no way I'd want to stay around after work in London and then watch 2 movies and then come home. So yeah, I really like that aspect of it. Like, my only I haven't really been to film festivals before. Occasionally would go with Mike Munzer from the Evolution of Horror podcast. If he had like a spare ticket or whatever, I'd go and see like one film at Fright Fest. But yeah, I've really enjoyed the fact that I could catch every film except for Friday, because I went out, and you're going to catch me up on what happened there. But I was able to catch every other film. It's really cool.
I mean, that's pretty good going, isn't it? And it's just like you said, it was nice being able to be like, right, I'm going to watch all of these films and I don't have to rush off to the next cinema screening. And sort of like that timing aspect was quite good with this, because they still did have that sort of cinema feel in terms of, if you missed that time when it started, if you were making dinner or sort of like doing something else, you would miss the beginning of the film. So they still had the sort of timing in there to kind of give it a bit of that festival feel, but being able to sort of like be like, right, okay, I'm here, I'm ready, this is this one, I can have a bit of a break, come back, now I'm ready for the next film. It was really good. Yeah,
watching something live, I actually haven't experienced for a long time. I don't watch a lot of live television. And you and I were texting sort of on and off as the films were on. And I guess I realised I haven't had that experience of just like watching something live with a friend in a long time, you know, because of how everything's been for the last year. If we went to the cinema, we wouldn't talk very much during the film, but we'd have a couple of comments here and there, and then we'd talk afterwards. So that was really nice. Like, I didn't realise how little I'd had of that, just a live viewing of a film with other people. I really miss that.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. So when you go to the cinema and you see something in that sort of live, get that live experience, you come out and you do, like, you'd go to the pub or something and you chat with your mates about what you just saw. Or even if you just go to the pub a few days later and you've just seen that film and you've sort of like had that experience, then you just want to talk about that film and just like really try and unravel it a bit, don't you?
Yeah. So I think 2 thumbs up for a virtual festival experience, right, from us?
Yeah, I think everyone who put the festival together, they did a really good job with sort of like pulling it off, because it must have been a really difficult feat to sort of get all of these moving parts working so that they could have 5 days where you've got films running. And I think they showed like 10 full-length films, and it was a crazy amount of short films, which I ashamedly didn't get a chance to see a lot of them. But there was like 41 short films as well they were showing on the festival. So yeah, that's congratulations to everyone involved, because that's quite a feat to do.
Yeah, I felt a bit guilty about not watching the films, but it was only 20 quid, and I kind of felt like I got good value from watching the films that I'd seen. So I wasn't like, damn, I need to watch all these short films, get my money's worth. It was, it was good value for what it was.
Definitely. So shall we talk about how we got our money's worth with the festival then? So shall we start with Tuesday and talk about Live, the first film we saw?
Ich habe mich daran gewöhnt, zu vergessen, wie es früher war.
Yeah, so Live, a German film directed by Lisa Charlotte Friedrich. Hope I'm saying that right. And there's going to be a few of them because it is a truly international festival. This is a new German film, and it kind of felt like a pandemic film, didn't it? But the Q&A afterwards revealed that that's not how it's shaped up in the writing of it.
Yeah, because everyone is basically in lockdown, aren't they, in this film? Everyone's got no contact with other human beings, and the backdrop is actually, so it's set in a time where there's a high risk of terrorist attacks. So public gatherings have been banned to try and prevent this from happening and prevent anybody from sort of like getting injured or coming to harm. So it was really fascinating seeing this and having everything that's going on at the moment happening, because it seemed like a very apt film, because you've got all of these people in this, like, closed off in their homes, and they've forgotten what human contact's like. They've forgotten what other human beings are like, which is like a fascinating thing for a film which didn't intend to come out during all of this pandemic stuff, just for it to have that kind of like connection to the zeitgeist of what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, like a weird premonition to make a film like that. And I do wonder, so the director said that they didn't kind of have that in mind because it was written pre-pandemic, but I definitely did wonder, like, there must have been some post-production going on, and I wonder how much of it was influenced by the pandemic. I don't know. Or maybe, yeah, just incredibly fortuitous that the plot was that, and then the pandemic happened.
Yeah, it's like, yeah. So what did you think of this film then? Did you enjoy it? What was your experience like of watching this one?
Yeah, I really liked it. It's a real, it's got a really good mood to it. We already said it feels like it's set in a pandemic, so it's very timely. I completely understand why they chose this to be the opening film of the festival, because it feels very current and now, and that creates a really good mood in the whole film. It's very it's a bit of a slow burn because there's no real action. The general plot is that because these gatherings can't happen, it's about musicians who want to put on a show, basically, and that's illegal, and that's kind of the whole plot of it. But there's no big conflicts. It's more about the emotions that go between the characters. So I like that kind of slow burn feel of it. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I thought the same thing, because it's like, it's the sort of the absence of having all of that human contact is really interesting to look at in the film. Just sort of like how important the music becomes in this with all of that added stuff, because the characters in this are sort of like, they're talented and they want to be able to perform live, but then having that taken away from them is sort of like such an integral part of being a performer and being like a musical artist or something like that. They sort of like, they really struggle with that and not being able to have that sort of human contact. And like we said, it's kind of like this experience, like going to a film festival, having that contact with people and talking about stuff, and not just having a screen to talk to, which I think there is, like, in the opening scenes of this, they have like a kind of like a Zoom call going on, and sort of how restricting that can be and how that can affect you mentally. I think it goes into a lot of that kind of like thinking and that sort of realm.
Yeah, it was cool. I really enjoyed it. I felt like it didn't go quite far enough on some of the more sci-fi elements that are set up in the first act of it, because it then becomes more about the characters who are going against that life. But I wanted to see a bit more of that. Like, the main character works as like a psychologist who counsels people after traumatic incidents, and you just kind of see that in the opening scenes, and then it's sidelined a little bit. And I thought that was the more sci-fi stuff, and I could have gone with a bit more of that, but it goes in some directions I wasn't expecting, and it left me left me feeling good on the first night of the festival.
Yeah, because it's got like lots of dystopian themes as well, and it's kind of like a bit 1984 in parts. So if you're looking for like a dystopian science fiction film, I think this is a good place to go. It's interesting with what the director's doing in this one, and especially with what's going on now. I think it's very apt. So yeah, it was a good film to kick off the festival, definitely.
So on Wednesday night, the first film was the Chinese movie Mirror Human, also known as Transcendent. It goes by two names, based on a novel, which is really, really hard to find any information about online. I don't know if you looked up the author, but I guess it hasn't been translated into English because I couldn't find anything. It describes itself as a Dickian cyberpunk tale. What do you think about that description, James?
I enjoyed certain aspects of this film, but then it did become a bit of a mess towards the end, sort of like personally. And obviously all of these opinions are our personal opinions, and well done to all of the directors who made these films. But just like looking at this from that sort of standpoint, it did sort of like unravel a little bit for me in this film.
Yeah, unravel is a delicate way of putting it, James. So the film is set up in the film's in 3 segments, and that's not a spoiler because this is in the synopsis of the film that was posted on the website. 3 segments, 3 of these transcendent characters who are like androids, and there are 3 generations of them. So there's the original Transcendent project, and then there were 2 more iterations, and they get more complex and more human-like as they go along. And I won't go too much into what those segments are, I guess, because that is when we will get into spoiler territory. And I don't know, James, maybe we can cut this out of the podcast if you think this is too much of a spoiler, but there is a post-credits scene that is half an hour long, and has a huge amount of plot in it. And I think we were both thrown a bit through the loop on that.
Yeah, I don't think that's a spoiler. I think that's something which is good to know going into this film. Because, yeah, it did seem like a really weird tag on. Because also, if you read the synopsis for this, part of that end credit scene is all just part. It's like looks like a major part in the free woven segments that they sort of like advertise it as, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's just an incredibly strange structural decision in the film that I just couldn't wrap my head around the point of it. The segment that comes after the credits is not super important. Like there is a whole story before the credits, and then there's just like another 30 minutes of story, which is like, say, the 3rd segment. But it feels very confusing if you've read the synopsis first, because you look back on it and you're like, oh, what were those characters? And then suddenly they're on screen as the credits are rolling. But yeah, there was some good stuff there. I think one of those 3 segments was excellent, kind of in the middle portion of the movie. And it feels like a whole story. It's kind of a love story, an AI android story, questioning what it means to be human, stuff like that they handled really well. But the rest of the film, I just thought there was a little bit too much going on, and they were trying to pack a little bit too much in. And especially having to pack it in after the credits kind of speaks to that being a bit of a problem for the film.
But it was like an interesting look at sort of androids and sort of like the steps in making androids, because it goes in the 3 different stories. It's kind of got like different ways that androids are used, sort of like from sort of like military use to just sort of like menial labor, and sort of what the development of those androids is like, and then how sort of like intelligent they get throughout these different progressions. So I quite like that aspect, and sort of like the idea of androids going against their programming and that kind of thing. All that stuff comes in there, and sort of, and again, like we said when we looked at artificial intelligence through our previous series, these films are all about sort of seeing how human you can be, and sort of like that reflecting on you and society.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, and I think that's why they put the term Dickian in the press release for it. Yeah, because it does kind of call back to like Blade Runner and stuff like that. These ideas about what it means to be human, what it means to be an android. There's some interesting stuff in there. but the film's trying to like cover that subject from all angles, which is why I really liked the bit in the middle that I thought basically handled that the best.
Yeah, I did get echoes of Real Steel when I was watching it, though, a film with Hugh Jackman. I just couldn't get over that because there's a boxing plot in this, and it made me think of that in certain ways.
High praise indeed.
I quite like Real Steel, you know, it wasn't too bad.
Okay, I haven't seen it because I don't want to.
Yeah, I don't think you will like it at all, Matt. So maybe steer clear of that one.
Okay.
But yeah, it was interesting seeing we've only looked at one other Chinese sci-fi film on the podcast, haven't we? Which was Wandering Earth. So it's interesting seeing these sci-fi films come through from China now. I mean, like we said when we did that episode, there's probably there must be a lot more which we haven't seen. So it's interesting getting the chance to watch this and sort of see how they're doing it in China as well, and seeing what science fiction stories are coming through over there.
Yeah, and the third film of the festival and the second film of Wednesday night kept that theme up, I think, because it was a Greek film, and I don't believe I've seen any Greek films in my life. I don't know what the cinema industry is like over there, but another great opportunity to see something coming from a country where we don't see a lot of films from, I think, normally. And that was Cosmic Candy, directed by Rinio Dragasaki, or Dragaski, I'm not sure. And this was kind of a surreal fantasy film. I think we were texting each other. We were kind of I was waiting for some sci-fi stuff to happen. It's not the most sci-fi film of the Sci-Fi Festival, but it lives up to its dreamlike hallucinogenic state, as the press release refers to it.
Hola, Carla.
Yeah, I've got to say, I really enjoyed this film as well. I was kind of waiting for the science fiction elements, like you say, but once I sort of got past that and just enjoyed the story and the characters, it really sort of it's got quite a lot of emotional weight to it as well, and it's funny. It's a funny sort of relationship story, isn't it, about this woman who is a bit quirky, a bit of a loner, and she strikes up this friendship with this girl, and then it's sort of what happens after that, and how it changes her as a person.
Yeah, I actually thought it was very reminiscent of Leon, the Professional. You know, the Jean Reno, Natalie Portman film where he's an assassin, takes in Natalie Portman, the young girl. It really reminded me of that. It's it's a non-violent version of that. She's not an assassin, but in the same way that they form a dysfunctional parent-child relationship, and she kind of has to take this girl in reluctantly and look after her for a while, and it's maybe not the best thing for either of them, but maybe it's the best option they have, and they make it work. That's the kind of theme of it, and it felt very similar to Leon.
That's a really nice comparison. I didn't think of the sort of Leon aspect of it, but yeah, I can definitely see that now thinking about it.
So I guess to describe it, it's kind of like Leon, but instead of a hitman, she works in a supermarket and she's addicted to a sweet called Cosmic Candy that they sell at the supermarket that gives you hallucinations.
Yeah, it's like a popping candy, isn't it? And there's a scene where she's having this popping candy, and yeah, she's obsessed with it, isn't she? She absolutely loves it, and then it kind of shapes some of the dream sequences you see later. And the dream sequences in this film are brilliant. I really enjoyed them. They're very sort of like you said, hallucinogenic, psychedelic, anything with a ick on the end. That's how you describe these. They're really colourful, and I think the use of budget and how they've managed to do those is really good, because the director in the Q&A afterwards was talking about how she wanted to do more, and if she had the budget she would have done more with those scenes. But watching them in the film, I was totally taken aback by them. I was really in those moments.
Yeah, they use very simple models and cartoony special effects and kind of mash them together on screen to create the hallucination scenes that you were just describing. And yeah, I agree, it worked very, very well, because the kind of visual tone of the film doesn't need more complex special effects for that. It works with the surrealness of it, that it's kind of low budget and they've just got some sort of blobby special effects and cartoons. Yeah, I thought it was really nice. I thought it worked really well.
It's got an excellent song about French toast in there as well.
Yeah, man, I was going to bring that up. Did you try and look it up afterwards? I think it might be like an original piece of music for the film.
Amazing. I'd watch the film again just to see that bit because it was so good.
Well, I just assumed that like there was a really popular song in Greece about French toast. So that's what I was Googling. I was like, Greek song, French toast ingredients. And obviously I was just getting recipes for French toast with Greek yogurt on it. But yeah, it's an absolute banger.
I think those were your exact words in the text you sent me as well. But yeah, definitely. I'd recommend Cosmic Candy. From a sci-fi perspective, I'd go in with it. I'd go in sort of like not focusing on, is there going to be some sci-fi? Is that going to happen? I'd just go in and enjoy it for what it is, which is like, I think I described it as an endearing comedy. And that's exactly what it is.
It is, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd recommend it as well. It was a good film.
So moving on to Thursday. And the first film of Thursday was I Am Human, which is a documentary.
We are about to enter into the most consequential revolution in the history of the human race, where we can take control of our cognitive evolution.
What if we could expand your capabilities beyond what we as humans have never had before?
So I found this one fascinating. It's a really interesting look at sort of like where technology is going to go. And it's looking at sort of the world's first cyborgs, I think they described them as. So you've got a hospital-bound tetraplegic, a blind retiree, and an artist with Parkinson's. And it follows their stories and the work of a group of scientists on sort of like new technology to sort of like help unlock the secrets of the brain and try and figure out how to help these people with their conditions. So what did you make of I Am Human, Matt?
I agree with you that it was fascinating. It was really, really fascinating. But I also found it incredibly, incredibly moving because it's focusing on brain implants and neurotech and the developments there and what could be achieved. But they, like you said, they use these three people that have illnesses and may benefit from neural brain implants and neurotech to kind of personalize that story. Like we can, you can make a documentary about advancements in brain technologies, but they use these people to put a very human face on that story, and it just became very, very moving for me listening to these people talk about why they would be interested in, having these experimental surgeries on their brains and the difficult decisions and conversations with loved ones they have to go through. I just thought it was very, very powerful and very moving and a very good documentary in terms of a documentary having like a purpose and something they want to say and then getting that message across in a really convincing way. So it's very pro neurotech and very biased in that sense, but incredibly well made and a very good storytelling in a documentary.
Yeah, you're completely right. It is that sort of emotional heart of the documentary which resonates so much because like if they had just done it focusing on the tech, I don't think it would have engaged me as much, but I was totally in those stories from those people because it is their real lives and they're talking about sort of what life would be like for them if they could fix these illnesses and these problems that they're going through and how amazing that would be for them. And it's just sort of like you want that for them, the whole documentary, and you're constantly hoping that these advancements will happen. And the things that they put themselves through as well to try and sort of like get these results is quite hard to watch because there's certain scenes where they've got like proper operation footage and seeing them sort of play around with people's brains and adding bits of technology, that really sort of, it made me very squeamish as well. And I'm not easily put off by stuff in films, but obviously this was documentary and the realism of it really got to me.
Yeah, I mean, I am a little bit squeamish, to be completely honest with you. And yes, I also felt that way. I guess a fair warning to anyone watching it, there are scenes of brain surgery. Not super graphic, but definitely some noises that really caught me off guard and made me feel a bit sick. It's got everything, this film. It's a real roller coaster.
And it's interesting looking at how these technological advances could progress and where they might go, because it goes into that as well. And sort of like how much information different companies are getting about you and that kind of thing, and sort of like what the future could hold and how important sort of like understanding the brain is. And they go into a lot of stuff about sort of like brain technology and sort of like implants that give you access to computer knowledge and stuff like that. I can't fully explain it, but they go into a lot of that, and they name check a lot of different companies like Facebook and Google and sort of all the stuff they're doing with like machine learning, and then looking forward to integrating using people's brains in that sort of like technology cyborg human melding pot.
Yeah, it raises some interesting questions about the ethics of this kind of technology. I don't think it answers those questions. I think it's more focused on the health side of things and the possibilities of the health side of things. And I think it's more interested in that. But it doesn't shy away from, I guess, raising those ethical questions, which is good.
And the second film of the night also sort of like raised a lot of ethical questions about experimentation and sort of like where technology could lead. So the second film was a film called Minor Premise, which was directed by Eric Schultz.
A man whose journey into the mind is the basis for all those who come after.
You recall that memories exist as physical imprints on the brain, even the ones that we bury deep in our subconscious.
So what did you think about this one then, Matt?
I thought this was an excellent pairing. We talked about this after the movies. It was a really good pairing of the two films this night, Thursday, was it? They worked really well together because we'd seen one about neurotech, and this one was fiction, but about a scientist who's like you said, experimenting on himself. And it's basically a Jekyll and Hyde story, like a much more complicated Jekyll and Hyde, bit of Jekyll and Hyde and a bit of Split with James McAvoy. He's experimenting on himself and trying to get his intelligence isolated in his brain, but he splits his brain and creates 9 or 10 different versions of himself, and then he's like at odds with himself. Now, I thought this was a very, very good film, and I'm so hesitant to say anything bad about it, but my abiding feeling coming out of it was that I just wanted to watch it again because it was so hard to follow. It gets really, really confusing in the second half because you've got all these characters playing against each other, but they're all the same guy, so they're played by the same actor, and it's really hard to follow. But the fact that I wanted to watch it again to clear all that up, I think is a really good thing. Like, I wasn't put off, I was just confused.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the same thing as well. Like, it did become a little harder to follow as it went on. And that's purely because there are so many different sides of this character you're seeing. And he only has like a set amount of time in each different, they'd like split off into 9 or 10 different consciousnesses. And each one is a different part of the brain and a different part of your psyche. So seeing the guy who played Ethan switch into all these different characters, at first you don't really know what's going on. But it does sort of say all this in the synopsis, so it's not a massive spoiler, don't worry. But it's so interesting seeing him change character so much throughout these scenes. And I think it was a really good performance because to be able to give these intense emotions and make them believable in each sort of like separate scene is quite a feat, isn't it?
Yeah, he's absolutely fantastic in this film, and that was definitely something that kept me interested and kept me watching even when I wasn't really sure what was going on. He's incredible. He's playing the whole range of human emotions, in theory. That's the idea that he's trying to convey, all separated out and taken to extremes. And the physical effect that it's having on him is really good, because I think it takes place, I can't remember the sort of time frame of it, but I think it's taking place over like a day or like a very short space of time. And it's just like, he's just crumbling away as the film goes on. His shirt's like getting stained with sweat and he looks completely haggard and gaunt, and he looks like a right state, and that's like an important part of the plot, is that it's it's literally tearing him apart over the course of the film. But yeah, it's like a really good ranged performance with amazing physicality. He was amazing.
And it's got a lot of sort of mystery elements as well, because you're constantly trying to figure out what these different parts of his psyche are and what they've been doing when they've sort of had free reign to like control his body. So you spend a lot of the time sort of like trying to work out what each part of his brain is and where it's sort of like being shown. And I loved all that aspect to it as well, because I was constantly just like, okay, so what is this part? And then what is that part? So that must be him as that. And I think it's got a lot of that kind of stuff. And you don't know exactly what's going on when you first go into it. And he's trying to piece together the puzzle as well as his brain. He's trying to do all of this in one go. So yeah, it's a really fascinating watch.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. I'd recommend watching it twice and being very patient.
Yeah. And also it's got a very interesting bit at the start where they've got like basically a Zoom call, and this guy's teaching on a Zoom call, and the director was talking about this afterwards. He said that wasn't even a thing, obviously, when they made the film. So now that's such a relatable thing for people that you would do a Zoom call if you were a teacher. When he was making that was supposed to be showing how isolated this guy was and how sort of like into his work he was, that he wouldn't even leave to go and teach a lecture. But now it's got a completely different meaning, because that's what happens all the time.
Yeah, it was interesting hearing the directors having to talk about like, just how everything changed and how they've had to, how the whole like cultural language has adapted over the last year. And filmmaking is such a slow process that you can get caught up in it. But we've seen a couple of films at the festival that have been really fortuitous with it, and this is one of them. And Live on the first night was one of them as well, where those elements just folded into things in the real world in a nice way.
And they make good use of their set as well, because obviously with any sort of low budget sci-fi, you've got to have a good setting. And the house where this is set it's creepy as well as sort of like claustrophobic, isn't it?
Yeah, very claustrophobic. There's only really 2 characters in the film. There's a couple of supporting characters that don't have very big roles. It's really just the main guy and his girlfriend trying to sort things out over the course of the night or the day or whatever it is. So that claustrophobic sense gets really ramped up. There's lots of stuff with like security cameras and watching the footage back and stuff like that gives it a real creepy vibe, as well as things get more and more intense later in the film. And
one of the other actors in the cast who is only in it a little bit is Bobby Briggs from Twin Peaks, Dana Ashbrook.
Was it?
Yeah, I kept when I was watching it, I was like, why do I know him? Why do I know him? Oh my God, it's Bobby Briggs, yeah.
Oh, right, okay. I didn't recognise him at all.
He's changed. He's definitely changed in this film. But yeah, that was a nice little surprise in this.
Okay, let's move on to Friday night of the festival. Now, Friday night was the American Astronaut and a report on the party and the guests, but I was otherwise engaged that night. James, can you catch me up on what I missed?
Okay, so this is going to be a tricky one to try and explain.
Oh, really?
So first off, the American Astronaut, which was showing as a free screening on the festival, and it was the sort of like a celebration of the 20th birthday for the festival. It was like the 20th anniversary this year, and apparently it was one of the first films they showed at the festival itself. This was absolutely mental, and I'm really quite sad that you didn't get a chance to watch it, because there's so much going on in this film. Louis Savvy, who's the festival director, described it as Marmite. So you will either really love this film or you'll absolutely hate it. So I loved it. I thought it was really funny. It's kind of like a weird sci-fi musical.
Oh, wow.
It's all shot in black and white, and it's kind of like reminiscent of the old sort of like sci-fi serializations like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and that kind of thing. It's kind of got all of that to it. And it's so mental, the plot of this film. So I'm trying to think of how to describe it. So basically, I'll just tell you a few elements that come into the film. So one of them is there's a planet which is a colony full of workers who have never seen a girl before. And in order to sort of motivate these workers to get them to work, there's one boy on the planet who once saw a woman's breast. And because he saw a breast, he's like the savior of their planet.
A singular breast?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was one breast. It could have been two breasts. I was just so taken aback by that as a concept in the film that I was like, what the hell is going on? So they sort of he does these performances for them and stuff to try and get them motivated. And he's dressed what's the name of the Greek god who has the wings on his sandals and the
Mercury?
Hermes?
Or is that Roman? Mercury's Roman, isn't he? Maybe it's Hermes.
I think it's Hermes. Yeah. He kind of looks like the old school Flash with his helmet on. So he does all these weird dances. There's a dance contest on this planet. And there's this guy who's traveling around delivering stuff to people. And he's sort of a gritty astronaut. He is the American astronaut. He's sort of rugged. And he ends up having to deliver this boy to Venus, where there is a colony of women,
of course,
who take one guy when he's 16 every X amount of years and basically make him their sex toy. So this boy is being taken to go over there, and then in exchange, they're going to send a woman to go to the colony. So all of that plot's going on. In the midst of that, there's a crazy professor who is zapping people to dust. And it's his birthday, and he keeps going on about it's his birthday. There's these weird prospectors which turn out to be aliens, and they have a weird baby who's in some sort of gimp suit. It's just absolutely mental. And there's loads of songs in it and dancing, and I didn't know what the hell was going on. But yeah, the American Astronaut, 91 minutes of absolute madness. And again, I'm sad that you didn't get a chance to watch it.
I'm absolutely gutted. Okay, look, I might look this one up and try and see if I can find it anywhere online. Let's move on. Please tell me the next one was rubbish and I didn't miss anything. A report on the party and the guests.
I actually quite enjoyed this one as well.
No.
I'm sorry. It was a good day, Friday. Friday was definitely a good day.
It was very absurd. It was more a feeling than a image, or it was. I can't I don't have a memory.
So this one was a bit mad. It was kind of like the mad day on Friday. Just the weird stuff was happening. So this took me a while to sort of really get into. So it's set in the year 2028, and they do some sort of, I didn't properly get this from the film, but it's in the synopsis. There's some sort of a pandemic, surprisingly enough, has scoured away most of humanity. And what's left of society is subjected to these pervasive logic of machine algorithms, is what it says in the synopsis. So basically everyone's dependent on technology. And it kind of goes into that, but it starts with the weirdest things. So there's a guy who washes up on the beach, and he washes up with this really fat dead woman from the looks of it. And he's dragging her along, and these people come and see her, and then he ends up taking this woman back to his house, and there's lots of flashes of other stuff going on. So this is where I got a bit confused. And throughout the film, he's kind of he's got this dead woman plugged into this computer interface, and you don't know exactly what's happening there. And it's kind of it's got all of that weirdness to it. And this guy he was called Rudolph, he's sort of going and meeting all these different people, and they're kind of on the outskirts of society. They're all people with kind of weird views on technology. There's themes of externalism, So they've got one guy who really believes in that, and sort of like the idea that the conscious mind is extended to technology and things like that. So it's this guy is talking about all that, and this guy Rudolph, who you don't really know where he's from, what he is. He's kind of like going around meeting these people and doing really weird shit. Like there's one bit where he's just talking to someone and then it's like she's hypnotized, and then he's like burying someone later. There's a lot going on in this, and I don't know if I fully understand it all, but it's a really interesting film to look at, and I kind of want to watch it again, because this is only 79 minutes. That's a joy of film festivals. When you've got films which are like an hour and a half, an hour and 20, they can be absolutely batshit crazy, and then you can sort of like be like, oh well, it's done now. What do I do now?
Right. Okay. Sounds like I missed a hell of a night.
Yeah. Again, it's kind of like, and it's got strong themes of AI in there as well in this film. And it's kind of like looking at humanity from that kind of perspective again, but it's treated in a different kind of way. But yeah, that's all I'm going to say. If that hasn't intrigued you, I don't know what will.
Okay, well, I was back in the fray on Saturday night, and we were back to another documentary, and it sounds like after Friday night, the pace slowed down quite a bit for Saturday night. The first film was Truth or Consequences, directed by Hannah Jayanti, an American documentary about the town of Truth or Consequences.
In a ghost town, you don't need stop signs. You don't need crosswalks either.
Oh yeah, I'm very lonely here. It's rare I meet somebody I can relate to, or I'll even let come close to my life.
I just don't know a lot of people that are in my 10-year age bracket of 30s.
They leave. This planet is dying. So for the longevity of the human race, it's moving elsewhere.
We're not going up today.
No, you're not, but you are visiting active spaceport.
3, 2, 1.
Had you heard of this town before? Because this is featured in, I think, a Doctor Who episode. So I was aware of it. Yeah, I think there is an episode of Doctor Who called Truth or Consequences where they go to Truth or Consequences.
I hadn't heard about it before. I found it really interesting, sort of like what this town is about. So the first thing, the fact that it's called Truth or Consequences, and it's changed its name because of a competition to do with a game show of the same name. So even that's just like a weird thing to go in. And it's also the first place to have a spaceport.
A commercial spaceport.
Yeah, that doesn't actually get used from the sounds of it.
Well, I was a bit confused about what was going on there, because again, the synopsis posted on the website listed a few details that I'd read beforehand. First of all, it talks about it as a speculative documentary, and says that it's set in the near future when the rest of the world lives on off-world colonies. I didn't get any of that from the film. I thought it was a much more down-the-line documentary about this semi-abandoned town that basically, I think it was a big like cultural thing in America, this game show called Truth or Consequences, naming a town. And then since then, as is often the case when there's a big cultural boom like that has no sort of, doesn't have a lot of staying power, I guess, the town goes a little bit downhill. And I thought that was more what the documentary is about. I wasn't getting any of that like speculative docudrama stuff that was implied in the synopsis for it.
Yeah, I think the only thing that sort of like, I got the same thing as you. Like when I was watching it, I couldn't really see that. But I think the only thing which I thought might be sort of lending itself to that viewing of the film was the sort of weird VR stuff they've got in there. So they've got moments where they kind of like, you thought your laptop had broken, hadn't you?
Yeah, I did.
So it's like this weird VR where it's kind of like half-rendered images of places in this town. And it kind of gives it that like weird sci-fi look. But at the same time, it's kind of like, it's quite hard to watch. And I will say as well, this film's quite long. It's very slow-paced. but you do kind of feel the sort of longevity of it as well. Like, and I think it needs to be that sort of pacing in order to sort of like get across all of these things about these people who are left behind, because that's kind of what I got from it. It's like there's these people who are living in this town and they kind of seem like left away from the rest of the world. They're not sort of moving with the times in the same way. And the town of Truthful Consequences seems to have a population of people which are sort of like 50, 60 above in terms of age. So I thought that was quite sort of like an interesting way of looking at it and sort of how they are adapting to technology and things like that. And living in a town where there is a commercial spaceport, but not having any real connection to that. Sort of like I found that really interesting to look at in the film.
Yeah, I think all that stuff is there. The whole feeling of being left behind and not staying up to date with technology, and then having the contrast of a commercial spaceport being built in a town like that. That was all really interesting. And that's all there, even though I don't think the speculative docudrama stuff is really there to read in the film. And it works very well to have a documentary about that subject without the need for any of the kind of fictional stuff that seemed to be, I don't know, missing.
It did feel quite bleak as well, because you said that as well after you sent me a text saying that you were on a bit of a downer afterwards.
Well, it was very bleak. I mean, it's a really good documentary, but it is incredibly bleak. There is not much hope to it. You don't get a sense that this spaceport that they're building in Truth or Consequences is going to rejuvenate the economy of this crumbling, fading town, especially because, like you said, most of the residents, or certainly the ones that we're shown, most of the residents seem to be over the age of 60. There's not a lot of like young people in the town, and what's going to happen to a town like that in 40 years' time? Well, the same thing that would happen to any town like that. It will fade away if there isn't like a serious rejuvenation of the town's economy.
Yeah, and the only young person that you see in the film is sort of like, her story is quite sad as well, because she says she has no opportunity to get out of the town because kind of when you're in there's no way out.
Yeah, it's pretty bleak overall.
Pretty bleak, but it's like there were interesting stories in there as well. Like hearing about these people's lives they sort of like I did get properly engaged by some of their stories. There's one woman in particular who has like such a fascinating life. Some of the stuff she's been through, like she worked in a circus, and there's lots of other things I won't go into that sort of like have happened in her life. But hearing her stories and then sort of like seeing how much she is trying to be optimistic about things was endearing.
You haven't seen Twin Peaks: The Return yet, have you?
No, I've still got my DVD copy. I'm trying to watch series 2 again so I can be up to date. But yeah, I will watch it eventually.
I'd just be interested to hear, when you do get around to seeing it, like what you thought of it, and if you thought there was any similarities to this film, Truth or Consequences, because there's a real theme of, and this isn't a spoiler for Twin Peaks, but there is a theme of decay. Like everything seems to be decaying in Twin Peaks: The Return. And you've also got these kind of wacky, big, larger-than-life characters that you had from the original Twin Peaks, but having them living in this now sense of decay in the updated version, that Truth or Consequences really reminded me of that. This idea of the town is just crumbling away, and you've got some wacky characters who are living in this crumbling, decaying town. It felt very much like Twin Peaks: The Return. And then to add on top of that, those weird, fragmented VR sequences that looked like a broken Windows Media Player visualization. There's also a little bit of that going on in Twin Peaks: The Return, but I mean, it's a lot better in Twin Peaks. But yeah, it really reminded me of that. So I'd just be interested to see what you thought of that, or if any of our listeners thought the same comparison if they saw the film. That's what it reminded me of.
Interesting. I can see sort of the Twin Peaks comparison though, just from seeing the other previous series. Like it's kind of got those weird sort of Lynchian characters, which are real people in this case, but you can see where David Lynch kind of gets his inspiration from when you actually see people like this in reality.
Yeah, it's a small town with big characters, and there's stuff going on underneath the surface of this small town. That's in all of Lynch's work, isn't it?
And that small town, big characters thing continued into Skyman as well, the second film of Saturday.
Some local residents claim to have seen an unidentified flying object just after sunset last evening, with one young man even claiming to have been visited by what he describes as a skyman.
He didn't look human. I knew he wasn't a human.
He has been so razor sharp focused. I guess I just figured he was finally ready to tell his story.
So Skyman was directed by Daniel Myrick, whose previous big film was The Blair Witch Project. So there's obviously a lot of sort of expectation going into a film like this. Is it going to be scary? Is it going to be like found footage? Is it going to be kind of like that? And I kind of went in trying to forget about that, but it did sort of creep its way up several times, because it is kind of like a found footage film, but I didn't quite know where it stood in terms of its found footage or dramatization kind of aspects. What did you think about Skyman?
I really enjoyed it. I think it's hard to really get into it when you know that it's the director of the Blair Witch Project. And I think I was really hyped up for it, and I did myself a disservice by being so hyped up for it, I think, because it's not as good as Blair Witch Project. Blair Witch Project was a once in a generation sort of film event. It can't be recreated. Skyman uses some of the same skills, like in Daniel Myrick's arsenal, I guess. But he's doing a slightly different thing with it. But it's that legacy of Blair which is hard to shrug away, I think, to really enjoy this film.
He said a really interesting thing in the Q&A. He said that they'd written up 3 different versions of this film. So one was just a strictly documentarian version, sort of more like Blair Witch Project. One was fully dramatized, and the other one was a hybrid, which is what this is. So it's a mix of documentarian and dramatization. So I think if I'd known that going in, I might have felt differently about it, because there's so many bits. When I was watching it, I kept thinking but then why is that camera angle there? Why have they got a drone when this is happening? And when they're in a diner, why have they're cutting in a sort of dramatization way? Why are they doing that? So I think that kind of took away a bit of the magic for me with this. But in terms of the story, I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, we haven't talked about the story. It's an alien abduction film, basically. And I think it's pretty fair to say, if you told someone this was an alien abduction movie by the director of Blair Witch Project, that's a pretty good summary of what's going on in the film, isn't it? He was abducted as a kid, and he believes that the alien is going to come back and visit him again on his 40th birthday. And they get a documentary crew in, basically, to come and make a documentary about him building up to that 40th birthday. And then the climax of the movie is the 40th birthday and what does or does not happen, with the aliens. And, it hits all those beats and it's very enjoyable. But yeah, I couldn't quite get into it because of that feeling of disappointment. I thought it was funny that you were because you texted me a couple of times about the drone footage and the editing. And I could just imagine because you do a lot of editing professionally, I can imagine you just being just seething, just watching it, just what are they doing? There's too many camera angles. Where's the crew supposed to fit in this?
I did get a little bit like that. But I also like this sort of because Carl, who's the main character in this, his family are doomsday preppers. So they've kind of got that aspect in there as well, which I found quite interesting. So there's a crate where his family used to spend holidays and stuff, and all of that kind of thing in the middle of the desert, and sort of how creepy the middle of the desert can actually be, just out there on your own. And then what are you going to find when you're just stranded there? So I loved all that kind of thing that it had going.
Yeah, that stuff was very good, and probably more like the Blair Witch Project than anything else. And that kind of happens towards the end. It did make me think that you could absolutely recreate the Blair Witch Project and set it in a desert instead of in a forest, because it's just as creepy, just in a different way. That kind of emptiness and darkness in the middle of nowhere that you just can't see what's out there. They get a lot of scares from that, I guess.
Yeah. And it was interesting as well because they talked about sort of like again with the zeitgeist aspect of it. This film came out has come out this year, and this year we've also had like the storming of Area 51 and all of that stuff in the news. So it feels like alien invasion, like alien abduction films are kind of like could make a comeback now, just with all of this increased press about Area 51 and sort of all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, didn't the CIA release like footage of a UFO from the early 2000s at the start of this year? And it just kind of like, I think it might have been post-pandemic, and everyone was like, yeah, cool, UFO footage. I've got other stuff to think about.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I know because it was on a Daily Show with Trevor Noah. He did a piece on it. And yeah, it was exactly that. He was just like, no, we haven't got time for this right now. Other things are going on. Aliens, please go away.
So what did you think overall with Skyman? Would you recommend this one?
I think it's an interesting one. If you get a chance, give it a go, see what you think, but go in knowing that it's not a strictly documentarian kind of fictional film. It's a hybrid. I think if I knew that, I might have just had a better ride. But yeah, again, it was interesting. I like the story. I like the characters. Yeah, that's the only thing that sort of like missed the spot for me.
Yeah, treat it more as a narrative film. I think that's good advice. I love Blair Witch Project. I think it's my favorite horror movie. Something I love about it is that, it's not a real documentary because of how it's presented. It would be impossible to be a real story where people died, it'd be awful. But it's made in such a convincing way that it feels just like a documentary, and that makes it frightening. And I don't think Skyman quite hits those beats. I was trying to artificially recreate that experience for my girlfriend, who I watched this with, who hates horror movies. So I know she hasn't seen Blair Witch Project, and I don't think she even knows what Blair Witch Project is because of how much she hates horror movies. Because I did mention, it looks quite interesting. It's by the director of Blair Witch Project, and if she knew, there's no way she would have watched it. So I think she didn't know. So she didn't I didn't say it's a documentary or I just put it on, and it was a whole other experience for me because I was just sort of like watching her out the side of my eye, like, does she think it's a real documentary? Oh, it's gonna blow her mind. And then she was just like, oh, is it acting? Oh, right, okay. And it was just really anticlimactic because I was like, oh yeah, I guess you can't just fool someone into thinking it's a real documentary.
Still, I think that's brilliant though. If you can watch anything like that and try and just go along for the ride in that way without knowing what it is, I think that must be just an amazing experience.
I don't know, mate. I don't think it was. I think she was just a bit unimpressed with the whole business.
Well, you tried, man.
Yeah.
You tried.
It was exciting for me to see what would happen. Anyway, shall we move on to Sunday night, the closing night of the festival, and I Am Ren.
Jeszcze tydzień temu moje życie było normalne. Prawie idealne. A teraz?
So I really liked this one, and I think it was a nice film to end on.
Yeah, this is like one of those perfect sci-fi films, isn't it? It hits all my notes. It's very simple with complex ideas. It's very low budget. And of course, the most important thing of all, it's 75 minutes long. So wham, bam. Thank you, Piotr Rikshois. Thank you. Wham, bam. Thank you, Piotr Rikshois. That's not it either, is it?
Yeah, we're never going to be able to pronounce these directors, are we, Matt?
Yeah, no, this is really cool. It's very moody and paranoid, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of like paranoia going on in this one. So it's essentially about a woman named Renata, and you find out early on that she's an android, don't you?
Yes, yeah. And I don't think that's that's up for debate. But the tensions of what's going on and what's the real story of the film run throughout the film, and I don't think we ever get resolution on that. But it's kind of about gaslighting, right? Because there may be problems with Renata. She may be a malfunctioning android, and they take her into like android therapy. Is it the company that made her that's offering that service?
Yeah, it's like a weird a therapy boot camp kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but then it becomes increasingly unclear whether she really is malfunctioning, or if she's malfunctioning in the way that they tell her she's malfunctioning, and that basically becomes the plot of the movie. And it gets increasingly tense, and the editing gets very rapid and scary at points, like real, like shocking, hard-hitting editing that makes you very uncomfortable watching it. I thought it was really cool.
And it plays with its use of scenes as well. Like there's one scene in particular which it shows like 3 or 4 times throughout the film, and each time it plays out in a different way and gives you a different explanation as to what's happening in the film. And sort of like why is Renata, is Ren malfunctioning? Is something else going on? Is someone tricking her? You've got all of this stuff going on. And then the whole film is kind of like centered around like potentially a sort of like abusive, domestic abuse kind of relationship going on as well. So it's got all of those themes running underneath it. So you're constantly sort of like second guessing yourself as to what's going on, and like who's in the right, who's in the wrong, what are these characters' real relationships like? And I think that's what's so interesting about this film, because we heard the director call it a inner space sci-fi, and a lot of it's all from Ren's perspective, really, isn't it? And it's kind of like her changing perspective and how she's viewing the things that she's been through. And I found all that really interesting.
Yeah, she's not entirely a reliable narrator, and it becomes a proxy for mental illness and how we treat people in society who are mentally ill, and also how they perceive the world, and the complexities that come with that, and the uncertainty that can come from experiencing the world in such an unclear way. And yeah, it's a great performance from the lead actress, who's communicating all of that, but also playing a robot, basically. She does a really good job of balancing those things up, and it uses that the kind of faulty robotic memory to take the place of a mental illness, basically, to make comments on that.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating way of using AI in this film to sort of like make comments about relationships and people's like mental states and that kind of thing. It's I don't think we came across anything like this when we did our artificial intelligence series. There was nothing quite in this sort of vein.
No, I don't think so. It's a shame this film wasn't out when we were doing series 1 of the podcast, because I would have loved to have covered this. And I don't know what would we have paired it with. What would be a good AI film that would go alongside this that deals with the same thing?
Sort of like Ex Machina and Her, I suppose, are sort of like the biggest examples of this kind of film, where they sort of treat AI in an interesting way. So I think that would be a good pairing for this, maybe.
Yeah, they were films where they're kind of using the AI to make comments on, well, I mean, all the films were using AI to make comments on humanity, but they were exploring very human emotions in Her, definitely, and I think also in Ex Machina, but kind of taken to the next level and trying to imagine what it would be like for an advanced life form.
Maybe even AI, because there's been a few narratives coming through recently of like androids taking the place of parents and that kind of thing. So in AI, it's a different sort of scenario, because the android is the child, but it's got that parental setup in there. But things like Raised by Wolves, I think, I haven't seen it yet, but I think that's dealing with a similar sort of thing. Ridley Scott's new series. And also like I Am Mother, which was on Netflix, that kind of like has children being raised by robots. So it's kind of like got those elements in there as well.
Yeah, it kind of touched on everything. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. So with that closed the festival. I had a really great time. Should we talk about what our favourite films were, James?
Yeah, shall we try and figure out which our top 3 were? So I think mine's going to be slightly different to yours.
Okay, interesting. I mean, hands down, I know what my number 1 was. Are we going to go from number 3 up to number 1, or just start with the best?
Let's go number 3 up to 1.
Oh, okay. All right then.
So what's your number 3?
I think I'm going to say Minor Premise, just because I came out of it so uncertain whether I enjoyed it or not, but it really left me feeling like I wanted to see it again. And I think that's a really good thing. That's very encouraging. So yeah, Minor Premise. I want to give it another go and see if I like it. What about you? What was your number 3?
I think my number 3 is going to be The American Astronaut, just because it's so mental and I kind of want to see it again.
I'm so gutted I missed it now. It sounds crazy. It sounds really fun.
Yeah, it was definitely a good one, Matt. You can try and seek that one out now.
Okay, then. What was your number 2 then?
So number 2, I'm looking through the list again because it's constantly changing in my head. Number 2, I think it's probably... I'm torn. So I really liked, again on Friday, A Report on the Party and the Guests. I really liked that. But I also really liked Minor Premise. And I think I'd probably want to revisit Minor Premise again before A Report on the Party and the Guests, because that one is so sort of like mad and full on. I'd quite like to watch Minor Premise again first. So Minor Premise is my number 2 spot.
And you're holding on to your number 1. Okay, number 2 for me was I Am Ren. Really enjoyed it. Really simple sci-fi, nice and short, does a lot with very little. Really cool film. Really like that a lot. So go on, what was your number 1 then?
I think I Am Ren's my number 1, you know?
Really?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was like you said, it's like all of the things we really like about sci-fi. It's like, it's got those interesting themes and it treats it in a different kind of way. I know we've seen a lot of AI films, but I think it was a really good one.
Okay, well, my number 1 didn't get a look in on your list then, James. Hands down, without a doubt, it was the documentary I Am Human. Fascinating, powerful, moving, sickening scenes of surgery. Just an amazing documentary. I know it's not fiction, so it's not quite sci-fi, but it deals with concepts that are just so rooted in sci-fi cinema and so fascinating and so interesting. I just absolutely loved it and I really want to see it again.
I think that's definitely a good pick for number 1. Brilliant. And like I said, there were so many films in there which I really enjoyed and I would like to revisit somewhere down the line. But that's it from our coverage of the 20th Sci-Fi London Festival from last week. So next time we'll be back to our time travel series, so look out for the next episode of that. In the meantime, if you want to get in contact with us, you can find us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're at Through Sci-Fi or at Through Sci-Fi Pod. We've also got a website, journeythroughsci-fi.com. and a Facebook discussion group. We've literally got every single means of communication on the internet. So you can come and find us, come and have a chat. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
That's all for this time. Join us next time for more Journey Through Sci-Fi.